This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
Here's your report.
Oh, thanks, Jane. I wish I could hire someone just like you.
Try LinkedIn Hiring Pro. It's more than a job board. It's like the recruiter you always wished you had. Hiring Pro uses real-time insights to match your role to LinkedIn's unique network of professionals and delivers a short list of best fit candidates. You'll spend less time sorting applicants and more time talking to the right people.
Let's do it. You're irreplaceable, Jane, but another you would be great.
Hire right the first time. Post your job for free on LinkedIn today at linkedin.com/quality.
Hear that? That's now Crispy and McCrispy strips meeting Creamy Caesar sauce. Sounds extra crispy. Caesar sauce at McDonald's for a limited time. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Hello, Eagles fans, and welcome to the Big-Legged Waistbenders podcast. I'm your host, Wannab. You can find my work along with Johnny Page and Shane Haff at the Eagles Film Room on Patreon, where we cover the Eagles year-round and the NFL Draft. And we'll be providing game video breakdowns and analysis of the run game, the pass game, defense, the offense, every single week after every game. Today, we will be discussing the safety position on the 90-man roster as we head into training camp. Today is the illustrious first day of training camp, where we start getting all those reports from beat reporters. I am excited and looking forward to it. We will commemorate this day with a talk about the defensive backs. We're going to talk mainly about safeties, but we will dabble into the nickel and corner position because the way this roster is set up right now, all these positions are somewhat intermingled when you look at the depth. It's not clear who's going to be a backup corner, a backup nickel, a backup safety to me right now. But mainly, what we're going to be focusing on today is the weak safety. Now, let me get into some explanation about strong and weak safety. For years and years, all of us old heads used to say free safety and strong safety because we lived in a single high world. The free safety was the deep middle guy. The strong safety was the guy down in the box. Well, those days are over. Even with defenses that play a significant amount of single high defense, a lot of times they're going to align pre-snap as a two high before they rotate into single high. And the jargon has to change to make sure everybody's on the same page, that they align correctly, that defensive coaches can communicate with each other well. And it's sort of morphing into more of the passing strength safety and the weak safety. Now, the weak safety is on the side of the field where there's less passing threats. There's less receiving threats, I should say. It would be usually in a 2-by-2 formation where you have two receivers on one side and two receivers on the other side. It would be the side where the tight end is, usually. Or if you have a 3-by-1 formation, regardless of what the three receivers are made up of, it could be two tight ends and a receiver, two receivers and a tight end, or three receivers with a nub tight end on the opposite side of the line of scrimmage. If it's a three-receiver side, that would be the passing strength. If it's a two-receiver side and both receivers are wide receivers, that would be the passing strength. So the one safety aligns over the passing strength side, the other on the weak side. Last year, really, Andrew Makuba, for the most part, was our passing strength safety, and our weak safety was Reed Blankenship. Now, ideally, you'd like to use your safeties right and left. That's not necessarily always an option. Strong coverage skills from a safety where they can play a deep zone as a cover 2 or a single high, and also occasionally match up with people one-on-one, mano-a-mano against the slot receiver or against the tight end. Those fellas aren't easy to find, especially when you're picking in the third round like we did with Andrew Makuba. So if you have a legit coverage safety, which I do believe Andrew Makuba will become, and we'll get into that later, you probably are going to be willing to overlook if that guy is a little bit on the smaller side and might not be involved defending the run between the tackles on early downs too often, because that coverage ability is more the prized possession that's harder to obtain when you're building your defense. So in the Eagles' case, that's the situation they found themselves in. They have a coverage safety who's more ideal as coverage safety only, and you don't want coming into the box all game long to defend the run post-snap. So you want to have that weak safety, a larger, more physical guy who can come into the box on early downs and defend the run. And it's no accident that that's what the Eagles drafted in the 7th round of this draft. Cole Wisniewski whiz with, you know what I mean? He is definitely a big physical, weak safety type. 6'3" and a quarter inch and almost 220 pounds and has former linebacker experience, and it shows. But before I get into that, I just want to talk a little bit more about the safety position overall. Obviously, Cooper DeJean is going to be playing safety. Cooper DeJean might be at safety more than fans realized. A fair percentage of the fans thought that we were barely ever in base defense where there's no nickel in the field. That's not true. We were in base defense roughly 25% of snaps last year, and with the league trends becoming more tight end and run the ball crazy, I mean, God, look at the tight end decisions made in the draft this past year. They were crazy. There's definitely a fad going on in the NFL where folks are tight end crazy, and that ties into running the ball. So the Eagles might find themselves in base defense even more than last season. Last season, they were in base more than the previous season. This year, they might be in base even more than last season, especially with the coverage skills that Cooper DeJean provides at safety. That allows you to go to base defense even more. See, when you go to base defense, one of the biggest problems is you take that nickel off the field and put a bigger guy on the field. And then your safeties might not be terrific cover guys. Well, when you take Cooper DeJean and move him to safety in base defense, then your coverage doesn't become as much of a liability in base. So in a way, not only due to league trends, but also due to game plan, matchups, and considering Cooper DeJean's coverage ability, we as Eagles fans might be seeing Cooper DeJean at safety more than the vast majority of us realize. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 30, 40%. And it doesn't have to only be limited to base defense. What if Cooper DeJean's been playing safety and base most of the year, and then you play the San Francisco 49ers, and from a matchup standpoint, your major receiver threat is a running back? Well, within Vic's scheme, you're better off with Cooper DeJean being at safety than nickel. Vic isn't going to, for 1 week out of 17, change his scheme all over the map. He's not going to do it. He's shown that, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. And you can't have Reed Blankenship cover that running back out of the backfield, and you can't have Marcus Epps cover CMC out of the backfield. We all saw how that went in that playoff game. So, in some matchups, from a game plan standpoint, we will have the ability, even in nickel defense, to have Cooper DeJean at safety. I think that won't be the norm. I think for the most part, he'll be a safety in base and still play the majority of his snaps at nickel. But it's nice to have that tool in the shed from a game plan and from a matchup standpoint to be able to take Cooper DeJean and move him to safety in situations where you actually need him there, even when you're not in base defense. That is not a small deal. In terms of overall throughout the course of the season, it's not the biggest deal. But when you have to win more in the margins and you have to out game plan a talented opponent deep in the postseason, having that flexibility to move Cooper DeJean around in your scheme could be the difference between a win or a loss. So it might not seem like that big of a deal as you're watching the games throughout the season. Trust me, my friends, my Eagles fam, it's a big deal. This is a competitive league. Any little schematic advantage you can muster up deep in the postseason, especially with 2 weeks to prepare for an opponent if we get back to that big dance, or if we have a bye opening week of the postseason, that matters. But enough about Cooper DeJean. So that weak safety, that safety in our rotation is what we're going to be focusing on most in this discussion. And we're going to be talking about the newcomers most, since we know what a lot of the vets can do. So that weak safety position, it's going to be ideally somebody that can defend in the box, that can cover in man on a tight end, that can drop to deep safety coverage on occasion. First, we're going to start off with our 4 newcomers. We're going to start off with Cole Wisniewski, and he is our 7th round draftee. The other 3 are undrafted free agents. There's other newcomers, but I'm going to focus on the rookies for now. I'm going to go from biggest to smallest in terms of size. Now, both in terms of overall size and arm length, Cole Wisniewski is the biggest of these 4 whippersnapper newcomer rookie safeties. He is, as I might have mentioned, 6'3 and a quarter, 30.5 inch arms. The arms aren't super long, but they're adequate, especially when you consider his other measurables and his height and his strength. I do think his size will be an asset for him, both in the pass and the run game. Unfortunately, he is more of a run defender than a pass defender. He's careful and smart in the pass game. He can contribute there. He's not somebody you want in a bad matchup against a dangerous tight end. If you're playing quarters or if you're playing man or 3-match, traditionally, that's the job of the weak safety. Oftentimes, they get matched up with that tight end. You don't necessarily want him in that matchup. Probably. I don't know for certain because when I watched his college tape, he was more of a zone defender and he was in on a lot of inverts where he came down to the flats. So it's not clear exactly what his man coverage capabilities are. I do remember one man coverage snap where he got matched up with a speedier wide receiver deep, sort of in the middle of the field, and he did a very good job for the first 2.5 seconds of the snap. Then there was some scramble drill going on. The receiver made one cut and then went deep, and Cole Wisniewski got dusted. And there clearly was not enough makeup speed to make up the difference. Now, luckily, the quarterback did not see that. It was during scramble drill, and Cole started off the snap quite well, despite that disadvantageous matchup. But it did give you a peek into his matchup coverage and man coverage abilities, and they're a little bit on the lower end. I'd say it's possible it's a little bit worse than Reed Blankenship in that regard, and a little bit better than Marcus Epps in that regard. He might be more valuable in coverage in more compressed areas, for example, the red zone, where he can use his size more. And he doesn't have to worry about being beat over the top and playing overly careful to avoid being beat over the top. So I could see him potentially being a more valuable coverage asset in the low red. On early downs as that weak safety, there's things schematically you can do if he finds himself in some matchups where he struggles. We do have two very good coverage linebackers this year. Yes, Nakobe Dean was a little monster in the middle, being physical and violent in the run game and in that blitz up the middle game, but he was a liability in coverage. The things that Jahad Campbell might be able to do as a linebacker are also quite valuable, and I would argue maybe more valuable deeper in the postseason when we do find ourselves against some offenses that are more varied in their attack and can throw the ball with more effectiveness to a variety of different receivers. Jahad Campbell does give us more matchup capabilities and more coverage call capabilities, and that ties into the weak safety position because you could take Jahad, or you could take our other even better coverage linebacker, Zach Bond, and put one of those guys on the tight end and free up Cole Wisniewski or whoever the weak safety is to just come down to the box post-snap more as like a quasi-linebacker and not have quite as much coverage responsibility. So there's different things you can do. Even in quarters, you can man up the weak side underneath. They might say lock the weak side. Basically, they're saying the outside corner and the linebacker play man coverage on the tight end and the wide receiver over there, and then that weak safety can roam as opposed to being tied to that tight end as much in quarters. So that's something else they could try. It's not something Vic does often, but he does do it on occasion. So having more coverage options at linebacker might free us up to have a weak safety who's not as strong in coverage. Also, obviously, having Cooper DeJean play safety a percent of the time also alleviates some of those concerns. So while it's not ideal that Cole Wisniewski is not a big-time pass cover guy, I do think he can contribute there enough for what his role may potentially be on this team. I do think that they consider Epps a placeholder, a vet placeholder, and they're hoping that Wisniewski can beat out Epps by the end of training camp or early in the season, or if there's an injury, step in and maybe never relinquish the weak safety position. I do think that that's what they're holding out hope for. And I do think it's a strong possibility. And I don't mind a three-headed rotation at safety of Cole Wisniewski, Cooper DeJean, and Andrew Mukuba. I think that's honestly a pretty good safety rotation. So hopefully it works out for Cole when he picks up the defensive scheme quickly. Hopefully he can stay healthy. He was a five-year senior, 24 years of age. He did have a serious injury with his foot, had surgery the year before his senior year. So he essentially only played 1 year with Texas Tech. And it was pretty cool to see him out there as a starter, pointing people around pre-snap, like the guy who knew what was going on when that was his first year as a starter at Texas Tech. This is a heady football player and a physical football player, and I'm glad we added him. That was a smart addition on the part of the Eagles and Howie, and I'm sure Vic was involved in that decision as well. Moving on to the next 24-year-old. All four of these young newcomers are 24 years of age, and they will get smaller each time. And with that decrease in size, it will become increasingly questionable whether or not these guys will be able to play that weak safety role. The second biggest of these four guys, Maximus Pulley. Maximus is my little personal favorite. Watching his tape, I fell in love and swooned a little bit with him as a draft prospect. I probably watched 5 of his games at this point and his highlights as well. I think that he's got some potential. I really do. He's only a shade under 5'11". He's about 200 pounds, obviously much smaller than Cole Wisniewski, but if you compared him to Reed Blankenship, I'd say he's about 2 inches shorter. Reed was a shade under 6'1", so he's almost 2 inches shorter, and he's about 5 pounds lighter. He's a little bit more compact than Reed, but Reed was basically one big muscle. He was on the Feldman's freak list for a reason. So I do think Reed could lay the wood a little stronger down in the box against the run versus Maximus Pulley. But I don't think Pulley is a nothing in the box. He can come down and make some tackles. Similar to Cole Wisniewski, he shows patience and ability to change direction while downhill in pursuit. He shows the ability to anticipate things. I do think he was a little less careful than Cole as a tackler and would lunge at times and would maybe come in a little too hot at times. But that was more the minority than the majority. And for overall, I'd say he was a solid tackler. If he had to step in at weak safety and provide that early down role, I do think he's capable. I do think he has more coverage of capabilities than Cole Wisniewski. Probably has more coverage capabilities actually than Reed Blankenship, from what I can see. Now, I will couch this by saying I'm seeing him at Wofford College against, for the most part, FCS talent, and some of it is not even the topper end of the FCS. So it's not like I've seen him tested in man situations against NFL level receivers often. In fact, he did not play a whole lot of man coverage, period, in that scheme. Just a solid all-around coverage safety. He looked like, to some defensive coordinators, I think they would actually make him a zone nickel. If you're a zone nickel who doesn't have to play a ton of man, I could see him playing nickel at the NFL level. He has some explosiveness. He has a good nose for the ball, and he could definitely do some things down in the box on early downs as a nickel. I'm hopeful to see him play some nickel during camp, but I think for Vic Fangio, more than likely, he fits the role of safety more than nickel. Vic, he's labeled a zone scheme, but he's really more of a match scheme and probably plays less true zone than the vast majority of NFL defensive coordinators. So while I do view Maximus Pulley as more of that coverage safety, who's less of a weak safety than, say, a Cole Wisniewski, I do think he can do some weak safety stuff. And if you need him in there for a period of time in the game or several games in a row due to injury, I wouldn't be surprised if he could fill in admirably at either safety role, the weak or the strong. Now, he was a decently explosive athlete. I think he was around 38, 39 inches in his vertical. His 40 time was the low 4.5. Some people say high 4.4s. The official time most people are going with is 4.52. It was interesting in that, like Reed Blankenship, most of his speed was in his first 10 yards, and you will see that 10-yard explosive burst from him as he comes downhill or against the pass or the run, or goes out to the sidelines to track a person down. He's got that burst in him. He's a smooth mover and a smooth athlete. He's not herky-jerky. I wish I got to see him in man more. I will be very curious in preseason games and in training camp to hear if he is matched up in man, how he's doing, and very limited sample size, both as a top-down coverage safety in match and in man. He shined. Now, that was at the FCS level, but he did what he was supposed to do, and some of that is probably going to translate to the NFL level. If you have a 2 wide receiver side, the wide receiver is the number 2 guy, and he has to cover over top that guy with no help as the safety in quarters, he might be able to pull that off. He showed a few reps, there weren't that many of them, where he was put in that situation. But when he was, wow, he made some wild plays. He was often the safety dropping down over the middle and as like a 3-buzz type quasi linebacker / safety in the box post snap against the pass, almost like a robber at times to try and steal the ball. And he did make some fancy interceptions doing that. He won't get the opportunity to do that more with Vic Fangio, but I do think there's something there to this guy, and I'm excited to watch him play. I actually like him the most in terms of the UDFAs at this present time, in terms of the safeties and defensive backs that they brought in. So I'm hopeful for Maximus. I am a fan, and I can't wait to see him against higher level competition. He may offer us some dual safety week and passing strength safety versatility. If he picks up enough of the scheme throughout training camp, I would not cut him, just from what I've seen thus far. Now, preseason may change that opinion. We'll see how it goes. But if he's learning the scheme, I feel like he has enough talent and enough safety smarts. He would make my 53. I would not take the chance of losing him. On to the next, another 24-year-old, Kapena Gushikin. He played with Ole Miss this most recent season. He was listed as a safety, but he spent a lot of time in the nickel. Gush, I'm sure he'll be called as his nickname, as Vic Fangio called him in one of his early OTA press conferences, and everybody got excited. Oh, who's this Gush guy that he mentioned? Vic must like him. I'm sure Vic likes him, but to be honest with you, Vic is just, he's a little senile, just like me, and sometimes especially early in OTAs. He can't remember everybody's name, especially the newcomers. He probably didn't even think of Cole Wisniewski. You could tell he was struggling to name people. So I wouldn't take too much from him mentioning Gush, especially when Gush might be a nickel and not a safety. And it turned out in those very OTAs, when Vic Fangio was commenting, Gushikin was at the nickel position, not a safety. He's got 4.35 tested speed. He's one little muscle. You can tell he puts the work into his body. He's got good start-stop quickness. He's got very good lateral quickness. I don't know if it's always totally under control, lateral quickness, but for the most part it is. And he's pretty under control when he comes downhill to make tackles too, and explosive. And he needs that. He needs that quickness. He needs that long speed because he's not the biggest guy. He's the next step down from Maximus Pulley. Whereas Maximus was a shade under 5'11", this fella is a shade under 5'10", and he is also about 10 pounds lighter than Maximus. He's around 190 pounds. So he's a smaller side, old school nickel, quick guy who was half safety, half nickel with Ole Miss. And now the nice thing about seeing Gushikin's tape was I got to see him as a nickel in man situations in that Ole Miss scheme more often than I did the first two safeties I talked about. And it was mixed. His size became an issue. And I might be a little bit harsh on Gushikin right now in terms of his man coverage ability and in terms of his size, because the 2 or 3 games I chose to watch were the 2 or 3 toughest opponents that Ole Miss faced all season. So maybe that wasn't fair. I didn't watch as many of his games as I did with Cole or with Maximus Pulley, but the 2 or 3 games I watched, he struggled a bit at times. Downfield one-on-one against Georgia in the playoffs, they realized that, okay, he will be on you, like white on rice in coverage, but you can box him out and probably get that 50-50 ball. And they realized that later in the game. They did that for a touchdown. And the wide receiver they threw it to wasn't necessarily a huge, menacing wide receiver. He looked to me like your average size wide receiver. He just got Gushikin on his back hip and just easily gave him the little nudge off. And Gush flew off, and he made the catch and got away with the push-off, as wide receivers will often do if they're crafty about how they push off late in the snap. And they got that touchdown. They realized, oh, well, we can do this again. And then they aligned so that they got the tight end lined up against Gushikin in a 3-by-1 formation. They ran a corner route downfield. And again, Gushikin got boxed out, couldn't catch up. And this time he realized he was going to give up a catch, and he just interfered late. They got called for the whistle, which was almost as good as giving up a catch. I guess it didn't turn into a touchdown that time. So there's that benefit. And then a third time later that game, something similar happened. I don't know if it's his fault or the outside corner. They had a mix-up on who was covering the deep guy. It was in the low red zone. He tried to recover and was recovering late to get to that wide receiver. He grabbed him a little bit, and that was another penalty in the low red. So he had some mixed results. He did have one bad missed tackle coming down from depth as well in that game. Not his best game. He'll stick his nose in. When he comes downhill, he realizes size is an issue, and he realizes he has really good lateral quickness. So sometimes he just avoids blocks as he's coming downhill to make tackles in the run game, and does a pretty good job of that. He just can slither in and out of blocks, in and out of the traffic down near the line of scrimmage, and get in there and make some tackles against the run. Oftentimes running backs will fall forward. He is a smaller guy. Some of the more powerful ones might break his tackle if it's an arm tackle. So I don't foresee him being that weak safety mold that will fit ideally next to Andrew Makuba for what we need. I think he has a better chance as a part-time nickel or as a dime player, or maybe even as an outside corner. But keep in mind, outside corners being somewhat strong physically downfield does matter. You don't want to get boxed out down the sidelines if you're an outside corner. So I'm not exactly where Gushikin will play. The Eagles certainly were interested in his services. He did get a good amount guaranteed as an UDFA. He got $200,000+ guaranteed. So he was one of the 3 most highly guaranteed UDFAs we signed after the draft. And I wouldn't be surprised if he makes that 53. Howie likes his testing numbers. He likes his fast guys. He'll see that 4.35, and probably every once in a while on a meeting, he'll say, hey, what about that Kapenna Gushikin? That guy I gave the extra money to. Can he make the roster? And he'll probably make some persuasive cases, even though he'll probably have no clue what he's talking about, because that's Howie Roseman. He is quite the salesman. And he does make the final decisions on who makes those 53. So I would not be surprised if Kapenna makes the final 53 and Maximus Pulley does not. Now, obviously, if only one of these two can make the final 53, I'm obviously leaning towards Maximus at this time in my personal evaluation. I could see it going either way. It's not like Capenna was a bad football player. He obviously puts time into his body and his craft, and he looked like a pretty good football player, unfortunately just a bit small. If he does do nickel, his footwork and his lateral quickness, it looks there for the most part. There were some times on crossers where I felt like he was late trailing wide receivers. Now, that's not as big of an issue when you're the nickel as when you're the outside receiver in the scheme. If you're the outside receiver in the scheme and you get caught on a crosser out of position, out of phase, it's more of a problem. As the nickel, it can be an issue, but it's less of a problem. It happens to Cooper DeJean, to be honest with you. He's not the quickest going across the field on deeper crossers himself. And gets away with it a fair number of times due to the structure of the defense. And I won't get too much into the weeds on that. So while he was a little bit late on those crossers, with his 4.3 speed, you would imagine that might get better, especially with his combination of lateral quickness and that speed. That might get better. He might run a stride for stride in phase with those speedy wide receivers across the field better than what he showed on tape in the small sample size I saw. His eyes also looked a little bit wide. In a lot of these schemes, it's a little bit like, oh, am I going to get this guy or that guy? And it could go a lot of different ways. It's not as structured as Vic Fangio's defense, where it's like, oh, this is my guy now. If I take my eyes off him, if I'm a little late on him, he catches the ball, it's my fault. Vic has your eyes a little bit more narrow on your assignment. Early in the season last year, Andrew Makuba, his eyes were wide. He wanted to go make plays, and he knew what his coverage assignment was most of the time, but it didn't seem like it, and it didn't seem like it because he saw an opportunity to leave his guy and go make a play, and that did not go well for him or for the Eagles, and I'm pretty sure he got a pretty stern lecture or two from above on that issue, and we'll delve into that in a little bit. So next down the list, I'm hopeful for Capenna, but I'm not as hopeful as I am for him as I think Howie Roseman and Eagles brass are. It could work out. He does have some talent and some quickness. Next down the list, the smallest of the four guys. I don't know his exact age. You couldn't find it listed. It's probably 24 as well, just like the other three guys. He is, ironically, Tucker Large, and he is the smallest of the four. He might be a shade taller than Capenna, but he's lighter. And he's a less explosive, and he has less long speed as well. I wouldn't be surprised. I think their arm length for each of these guys is a tiny smidge smaller each time. Cole Wisniewski is at 30.5 inches. The other three UDFAs, Maximus Pulley, Tucker Large, Capenna Gushkin, are all in the 29 plus inch range, so they all have smaller arms. I think Pulley is slightly longer than Capenna, and Capenna is slightly longer than Tucker. Tucker really looks like an old school 1990s nickel defender. He's a tiny guy, not super fast, but quick. A smart, heady defender. He played safety in college. He did play some nickel as well. He got into a lot of situations where I got to see him in man, and he was sticky in man coverage against tight ends and some receivers as well. He had some sticky man coverage ability. He's the type of guy I could see making the practice squad, and you just kind of keep on hand if you need him if there's an injury. Or maybe you decide you're going to play more dime personnel. Maybe one of your two highly regarded linebackers are injured or it's not going well for them, and you decide you want to play some more dime on passing downs. Tucker seems to me like a guy you could bring in on dime and cover that tight end, cover that running back, cover some wide receivers, and really just eliminate the target. He's good in man coverage. Despite not being the biggest guy, despite not being all that explosive, I don't know exactly what his explosiveness or speed was. Unfortunately for him, in his bowl game, in his last game of his college career, he had a knee injury and had to have surgery after the season. I don't know the nature of the injury. There was some thought he could come back from it this offseason, but he was waived injured by the Eagles. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, if he was waived injured, that means he's no longer with the team. Why the heck are you even talking about Tucker Large? Well, I'm talking about it because kind of like the girlfriend that you broke up with that won't go away, he's still there. He's still with the Eagles, and he's watching everything, and he's learning everything. And he seems to be soaking it up. It seems like he's part of the team despite being waived injured. So I don't know exactly what his deal is. I don't know if he's technically on injured reserve. I don't know if he's injured reserve with the designation return. It sounds to me from the reporting that he's just waived injured, and they sort of know that he's probably coming back at some point once he gets healthy, or at least has a chance to come back and compete. So he's sticking around. Maybe he doesn't have a ton of other options, and he knows he's hurt, and he just decided, it's better to take this injury settlement, and it's better to stick around with the team if they're going to allow me and continue to learn in the event that I heal and I come back. So I think Tucker might be in their future plans. We'll see how it works out. He's a great candidate to be cut and make it to the practice squad because I don't think he's going to be highly sought after, but I do think he could be a nice, solid role player. Another thing Tucker Large did that I noticed, back when he was with the Jackrabbits in South Dakota State, he did do some punt returns. He didn't do it his last year with South Dakota State, but the year prior to that, he did a lot of punt returns. I think he was their leading punt returner, and he had some good games. He was not a zero in the punt return, so it's nice to have another guy who's a punt return option. If Howie runs into a number crunch and he wants to keep a couple guys on reserve initially to start the season, Tucker could be one of those guys that he will keep on that practice squad and do as a protected practice squad call-up a game or two here or there to just perform the punt return role or a defensive back role here and there. So I think Tucker can do that, and I do think it was a smart addition, and hopefully whatever injury he has is not too serious, and he will come back from that. You may have guessed he is not a perfect fit for that weak safety role. He is a fine tackler, and he is a physical player, but he's small. So I doubt that he's somebody you ideally want in a rotational weak safety role all season long. Can he fill in there a bit here and there? Probably. He's a physical guy and a smart guy and a tough football player, but he's probably not who you want coming down into the box post-snap to defend the run. So that's the 4 guys, and I look forward to seeing these guys compete, and I hope a couple of them make the team. And I do think there's a chance that there's roles for a couple of these guys, either early in the season as valuable depth pieces, rotational pieces, or maybe even starters at some point this season. So I'm looking forward to seeing these guys play. On to some of the vets. Marcus Epps, we all know his story. Good football player, good former Eagle. I'm glad that Epps is here. Me personally, he would probably not make my 53 roster. He probably will for the Eagles. He probably will in the minds of most Eagles fans. I felt like he's just too much of a coverage liability, and you saw that in the postseason against better competition, how that became an issue. It limited you schematically with what you could do. You ended up with Reed Blankenship on CMC instead of a safety more suited for that responsibility, and it didn't go too well. And normally that would not be, I don't think if Andrew Mukuba was healthy, that Reed Blankenship would have been covering CMC as often as he did in that matchup. I think that Vic would have came up with some sort of other solution. At least I hope that he would have. Epps is a solid football player, a smart football player, very physical, violent hitter. Good in the box on those early downs. If he has to be a temporary placeholder, weak safety, especially since it's just a rotational basis during the regular season, I think I can live with that. I am hopeful that one of these guys.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
Knock him out of the rotation and hopefully to the practice squad at some point during training camp or during the season, because if we hit the postseason and he's still the weak safety, I'm concerned. These better offenses are going to find the weak link and they're going to take advantage of it. Now, before I poop too much on Marcus Epps in terms of his coverage ability, it is worth noting that in the previous season, he did have a serious leg injury that he came back for, and last year was his first year back from injury. So now a year removed from that serious leg injury, it's possible that Epps regains some of that change of direction and some of that quickness that he lost. He was never the most elite of coverage guys, even when he was in his prime, back with the Eagles in 2022, when we went to the Super Bowl with him as a solid safety. Even then, he wasn't an elite coverage safety, but he was playable, and certainly more playable as a coverage safety then than he is now, or was for us last season. So I am hopeful that Marcus Epps regains form. He is age 30 now, and he has had a lot of violent collisions because that's how he plays. So I'm doubtful that we're going to see the old Marcus Epps. If we do, great. Then you got your weak safety on early downs. If we don't see the old Marcus Epps, which is likely the case, we need to do something there. I don't think we can work with that situation in the postseason. Marcus Epps showed some of his coverage liabilities in situations where the nickel had to blitz, and he had to cover a wide receiver as a result, mano a mano. What they would do is they would do sort of a bracket between the deep middle safety. Instead of a true deep middle safety, he'd be deep middle, but to be doing more of a bracket on that receiver if that receiver broke into the middle of the field to help protect Marcus Epps. And when Marcus Epps was the deep 1/2 safety, he did at times lack ability to make the deep open field tackle if there was a deep completion and something went wrong. He did at times show the inability to come off his half field assignment and make a play deep middle on the ball in situations where maybe another safety might have gotten there and he didn't. Now, those are things that don't show up in your television. I am hopeful that something happens there with Marcus Epps. But I'm glad he's on the roster for now, even though he probably would not make my 53, and I am hopeful that he regains some of that quickness. Next, I will talk about J.T. Gray. He is a long-term special team stud. He is around age 30-ish now, and it looks like on the field as a safety, he is more of that Marcus Epps mold as a safety. He might be even more of a liability in some ways in coverage. He's more that box safety and a special team specialist. I'm not hopeful for J.T. Gray making the roster. It's very possible if none of these young guys pan out that they keep both Gray and Epps on the roster for their veteranness and that they keep Gray on the roster for special teams. Hopefully our special teams is good enough that we can let JT Gray go and that he's somebody that just goes to the practice squad. JT is now a vested veteran. If he's cut, he doesn't have to go through waivers. He's probably going to make it to our practice squad to keep on reserve there if we need him for depth. So I suspect he's going to be cut. I don't know how it's going to play out, but we'll see. That is JT Gray in a nutshell. A good special teamer, a bigger physical safety, more of a box safety, a coverage liability, and probably behind both Marcus Epps and Michael Carter, and eventually behind some of these rookies that I spoke about on the depth chart at safety is my guess. And on to the next. Next we'll be talking about Michael Carter II, historically a nickel in the league. He does have some snaps at outside corner throughout the years. He does have fewer snaps, a smattering here and there at safety, not many. He started getting some safety playing time in practice last year when we acquired him. He's getting more of a look at safety now in OTAs. I think he's another one of these vet placeholder guys they have in their mind where, okay, if there's an injury to Makuba or if he's not truly recovered from that injury he had, because it was a bit of a nasty injury to his ankle. If he gets hurt at any point in the season and we need a coverage safety, maybe the speedier Michael Carter can do that coverage safety role, or maybe even weak safety. Maybe he's physical enough in the box that he can handle some weak safety at times against the run. So Michael Carter is another one of those vet placeholder types. I hope that Michael Carter is not our backup safety and is not our rotational weak safety, not because I don't think he can do it, although he probably lacks a little bit of size and strength for the role. He probably can do either role to an admirable degree. To me, he's that Swiss Army knife depth piece that you can use almost anywhere, Michael Carter, so I'm glad he's on the team. That was a smart pickup by Howie. But I'm hoping it's not safety where we see him this season. If it is, that probably means our other options didn't pan out super well and or there's a serious injury to Makuba. So I'm glad that he's getting this experience at safety. I'm hopeful he backs up at another position. Now, Michael Carter, he is on the smaller guy. He does have some legitimate speed. He's still sort of in the prime of his career. He's 27 years of age. I think he still has enough speed left where he can contribute at nickel or outside corner even. I watched his outside corner reps from the last few seasons, and there wasn't many of them, maybe 20 or 30. He was solid. He was more of his own corner than man, but even at man, he wasn't brutal. Against A.J. Brown, he showed really good recovery speed. They tried to target him deep a few times against A.J. Brown in 2023 when he was a Jets nickel playing at outside corner in that particular game. And he recovered and broke up the passes against A.J. Brown multiple times. He did a respectable job against Slim as well as an outside corner. Slim beat him once or twice, but it wasn't for huge gains. And he doesn't have the perfect footwork for an outside corner. He's more of a sideways shuffler, which means on in-breaking and short routes, he might have trouble transitioning back downhill to make a play on those routes. So he's not your ideal outside corner, but just 1 year ago, we had a guy who had struggles with that as well. He played like a mile off the ball. He had better backpedal and better footwork as an outside corner. I'm talking about Adoree Jackson than Michael Carter Jr. does. But while he had that better footwork, he was playing a mile off the ball and had probably a little bit less recovery speed and a little less play strength than Michael Carter, even though Michael Carter is a small guy. So to be honest with you, they started protecting Adoree Jackson a lot throughout games last year. That's why they made him the field corner. You would think to yourself, why would you put the weaker cornerback in a position where he's defending on the passing strength side? Well, the reason why is because that freed up Vic Fangio to play one of his better coverage calls, which is cover 8, where he played 1/2 to the field. And that essentially made Adoree Jackson a cover 2 corner a significant percentage of the time. And that helped alleviate the problems we had with Adoree Jackson being out on the island at cornerback, which he can't do all game long at this stage in his career. Well, if we chose the same approach with our backup cornerback, and we're probably going to have to, no matter who our backup cornerback is, if they have to play extensive playing time, against legitimate passing attacks if there's an injury to one of our top two corners. Our options right now are the two guys who stunk out the joint last year. I don't want them playing backup corner. I am way more comfortable with Michael Carter at backup outside corner, even if you have to protect him a little bit as a cover two corner, like we did with Adoree Jackson some of the time last year. I know what I'm getting snap to snap with Michael Carter at outside corner. I saw it on tape, and it wasn't all bad. I don't know what I'm getting snap to snap with the two corners that we all know from last year who got some playing time. That was crazy. That was ugly. You're going to have to protect them too if they play. And there is going to be times when you're playing quarters and you're essentially man on deep and you're playing single high and you're mano a mano. I don't trust Jacorian, Bennett, and Keely Ringo at outside corner at all. I know that Jacorian has shown some ability as a man trail soft press corner, but Vic tends to play that a minority of the time. And even in that role, Jacorian has a fatal flaw that other teams were taking advantage of, where they would skip and slow release or skip release their wide receiver slowly off the line to back Jacorian up more, so he never got in that man trail position. And then he just turned around. And he'd be open. Jacorian can't play top down, even when it's only a few yards off. He has to get into that trail position and use his athleticism, playing run and chase on that backside hip to be at his best. But even in that soft press position, teams realized they could just skip release, slow release, keep Bennett in front of them instead of behind them, keep him off that trail position, just turn around and be open on a quick hitch. I've seen it happen too many times. The opposition knows they can do it. So unless Vic is willing to let Jacorian play a ton of man trail, and unless Jacorian realizes that even when he's in man trail, he has to get in trail immediately. He can't skip off with the receiver. He has to do the opposite of what the vast majority of cornerbacks throughout football have been coached to do. Don't skip off if it's a skip release. Usually if it's a skip release or a slow release, you want to maintain that cushion because the receiver is trying to just eat up your cushion and create a new line of scrimmage before he gets into his moves. But in the case of Jacorian, you don't want to maintain that small cushion in soft press. You want to let him get by you. It's the opposite of what you're coaching every other soft press cornerback in America because of what Jacorian's fatal flaw is. He's bad transitioning back downhill. He's bad playing top down cornerback. So unless he fixes that fatal flaw and Vic is willing to allow to play a much greater amount of soft press than he's allowed his cornerbacks historically to play, I don't see a point in Jacorian Bennett being on this roster. And unless Keely Ringo is the most amazing special teamer in the history of special teamers, I'm exaggerating obviously slightly, but unless he is such an extreme special team stud, I have no interest in using up a 53 spot on Keely Ringo. Get these two guys away and just make Michael Carter a top backup at multiple positions, especially outside corner. The way I see it, he is currently the best backup outside cornerback on the roster right now, assuming he didn't lose too much of his speed. He is only 27. I think he probably has enough of it left, enough of that deep recovery speed to play mano a mano on the outside. So that's how I would approach it, unless Keely Ringo and Bennett wowed me in camp in ways they've never wowed before, which I'd still be cautious about trusting. I don't see how these guys can play outside cornerback. What's the point in having them on the roster? So a lot would have to change during training camp and within Vic's scheme for these guys to play outside corner. And when I look at our depth chart, there's nobody left. We don't have that many outside corners. And that's what got me delving into Michael Carter's outside corner tape. And if you do with Michael Carter what you did with Adoree Jackson last year, he's passable as CB2. And he's a better option than anybody else we have, more than likely. So I am keeping Michael Carter on the roster as that jack-of-all-trades backup. I want him less at safety. I want him more at outside corner and a nickel. That's where I want him. I'm glad he's on the roster. And on to the next. Let's see. We will talk about Shaun Wade. He is a formerly well-regarded and Ohio State, I believe he was, nickel defender years ago. A lot of fans got excited about his play when they saw him on national television on Saturdays. The season after that, he played more outside corner, did not shine quite as much. He fell in the draft. I'm not even sure he was drafted. I watched his tape, and I barely got through a game. He was not the cornerback for me. Just too slow and long-legged. He's a long-lived fella. He's got long arms, which helps playing defensive back, but I just don't see the transition, the change of direction, the speed to see how he could play outside corner or even really nickel in the NFL. And that's probably why he found himself out of the NFL recently. I think he was with the UFL, if I remember correctly. So he's getting another shot with the Eagles. Unless he performs some sort of transition to safety, in my opinion, he's probably a camp body. And I'm sorry to sadden some people who were excited by the Shaun Wade, who probably recognized the name and were excited by the addition. I am not excited by the addition unless they're hoping to switch him to safety and he really shows something there. Even there, I don't like him ahead of Maximus Poli. I don't like him ahead of Cole Wisniewski. I'm not sure I like him ahead of Tucker Large at safety, who's currently injured. So I'm not big on this addition. He's probably a camp body. I hope Shaun Wade proves me wrong and really turns it around, because if he does, we'll all be better off as Eagles fans with the increased competition on the depth chart. He's currently listed as a DB. I don't think they even know where he's going to play, but we'll see what Shaun Wade does in the preseason. Cooper DeJean, I'm not going to talk about him. We all know what he can do. I've talked about him enough. Tariq Castro-Fields, more of an outside corner, historically not the greatest tackler. When he's in conflict, he does have some nice short area click and close that made me think maybe this guy should convert to safety. I have seen nothing regarding them being interested in transitioning him to safety. He's listed as a DB and not cornerback, so there must be some thought of cross-trading him at some sort of position. Maybe nickel, maybe safety. I don't know. As an outside corner, he's probably a camp body. And I don't see how he could be a full-time starter if there's an injury, outside cornerback in the scheme without a lot of help. I don't see how he'd be any better than Michael Carter, and probably worse than some other options if they're forced into play at outside corner. Ambry Thomas also signed at outside corner. Also a name some people might remember and be excited about because he was another guy who was the heartthrob of a lot of people during draft season. He was not for me, and I'm not surprised he's struggling to stay in the league. I'm sorry to be such a negative Nancy. I don't see how he's a cornerback in this scheme. Hope he surprises me. I think he has a better chance of surprising me than Tariq Castro-Fields or Shaun Wade. So out of the camp body DB / outside corners who were added, I think Ambry Thomas has a better chance to make the 53 and potentially play some outside corner for us than Tariq or than Shaun. So I'm hopeful that Ambry shows me something as a man coverage guy that I did not see from him in the past. So I'm not talking about the outside corners a lot. I'm just kind of burning through because unfortunately it's all tied together. As you can see, we don't have much in terms of outside cornerback depth, and that's even more reason why maybe we want to keep Michael Carter Jr. and one or two of these UDFAs on the roster who can play at other positions and make Michael Carter the top backup at outside corner. Food for thought. That certainly would be my approach at this point, unless somebody wowed me in camp. Back to safety and nickel and corner, there was another DB we had brought in, Jonathan Jones. Now, I watched his recent tape, and he's lost a step, but I think he has a better chance to make the roster than the Tariqs, the Ambrys, the Shaun Wades of the world. He's a heady player, and he shows some versatility. So despite losing a step, despite needing to be protected a little bit in deep coverage, he's kind of like an Adoree Jackson, but worse in coverage, in my opinion, in man or match coverage on the outside. Despite that, he does show some position versatility. He can play some nickel. He's shown that some on tape. He will come downhill from depth and make some nice tackles, which made me think maybe he should get a look at safety as well. For right now, it looks like they're looking at him as competition at both backup nickel and outside corner, and he could make the roster. I kind of like the idea due to the versatility, to the veteran play of keeping Jonathan Jones and Michael Carter on the roster more than Ja'Cory Bennett and Kelee Ringo. So finally, that brings us next to Mac McWilliams. Now, Mac, I might have been a little bit too high on as a draftee. I did like him. I would not have drafted him the way it played out in the draft, but I didn't hate the fact that the Eagles took him as a late-round pick. I did think he was a late-round worthy option. He showed some strengths and some weaknesses, both as a nickel and as an outside corner, but he showed enough strengths and enough smarts and enough physicality that I thought there could be a role for him of some sort, either at nickel or outside corner for depth. So I liked the addition. He lacks some size, he lacks some strength, but I would say he's stronger physically at the point of attack in the box if he's playing some nickel than Kapena Gushigan. So he can stick in his nose in there against the run, even though he's not the biggest guy. And even though he's not the greatest guy from a man coverage standpoint at outside corner, I don't think he's hopeless there. I saw something. He has a nice speed turn. He has a pretty good click and close. The issue is everything else. His footwork is not there. He has college outside cornerback footwork, and it works at nickel in coverage more than it works at outside corner. I think he's less of a liability at nickel and is in the running as a competition for the top backup nickel with Michael Carter and with Jonathan Jones, and with Kushikin, apparently, who might also be competing mainly at nickel. So he's got a lot of guys to compete against, so it's possible he might be on the outside looking in with the way this 53 shakes out. Now, he's right on the cusp. He's right on the edge for making the 53 for me. After rewatching some of his tape, I'm a little lower on him than I was just a month or two ago when I did a write-up that you could find for free on the Eagles Film Room. I did a safety and defensive back review where it was a written review a month or so ago. Forgive that shameless plug. Just know that I have hope for this guy. He's a physical defender. He's a smart defender. He's a little bit more linear when he comes downhill as a tackler than I was expecting. So I'm not as hopeful for Mac McWilliams as I was. But if he fixed his off-man footwork, his match footwork, he might be able to contribute more to outside corner than he did last year. His off-footwork was a mess, and he had to play too cautiously, protecting himself deep. And as a result, anything short or inside breaking, borderline useless as an outside corner. So if he fixes footwork, if he find some sort of quarter turn or some sort of, I call it the fencing backwards footwork, where your front foot is facing more forward, your back foot is more to the side, and you could speed turn out of that if it turns into a deep route, or you can baseball turn out of it. And it provides you the opportunity from that type of footwork to break more on a downhill or in-breaking route. Now, ideally, an outside corner could backpedal, but not everybody can backpedal. Not everybody can do it like Darius Slay. Even our star receiver, Quinyon Mitchell, he's not the greatest backpedal guy, and he goes to other smart methods. I want to see Mac McWilliams find other smart methods with a trainer in the offseason to adjust his backpedal so he can make a play on more routes. If he can do that, he has enough downfield speed to be a potential contender as one of the top backup outside cornerback positions. So I haven't lost all hope for Mac McWilliams at outside corner, and I definitely think there's a greater possibility of him contributing at nickel. But with all the new competition at nickel, he has an uphill battle to make the 53. Would I choose Mac McWilliams over Ringo or Bennett? Absolutely. I would choose a mannequin over those guys at this point. I would choose a sign. Stop, don't go here. And I would stick it in the deep part of the field over one of those guys at this point and hope that would confuse the wide receiver. But, Mac, I'm rooting for you. I think you're a tough, hard-nosed football player. I sure hope you got that off-season footwork in and you worked on that footwork in those transitions. I believe that leaves one final guy to talk about, Andre Sam. Boy, I like me some Andre Sam. He is a physical player and a little jitterbug. He doesn't have long speed. He's kind of average-ish size, not very big, doesn't have as much athleticism as Maximus Poli or as much coverage ability. Open field tackling, from what I saw in the preseason last year from Andre Sam, was a bit of a question mark. Tackling in the box was not. His ability to come down to the box, even though he was a small guy, and make plays on the ball against the run on early downs, it was nice. He was so quick that he'd get around blocks or dive into the gap where he needed to be so quickly that he was really a plus run defender on early downs from that weak safety position. And he's a good candidate for the practice squad. He's probably not going to be stolen if you cut him, especially if he improved that open field tackling. If he improved that open field tackling and he's passable in coverage, maybe I'm not giving Andre Sam enough credit because he is a tough, smart, quick as a jitterbug in short areas, hard-nosed football player. So he's a limited coverage guy, needs to get better with the open field tackling. If he does, he's got a shot. It's a puncher's chance of making that 53. So that's my review, folks. If you stayed with that long talk, I applaud you because not that many people would. I shouldn't be saying that on an audio-only podcast. I hope you guys are listening. I hope you guys picked up a thing or two. I hope you guys enjoyed, you sickos out there who want to learn about all the different defensive backs on the roster. Thank you for listening, and the new season is upon us. Training camp has started. Go Birds!